The Metroid series has been one of Nintendo's oldest franchises that had one hell of a ride during the past couple of decades. From its acclaimed early days from the 80s to 90s, to becoming one of the big franchises during the GameCube to Wii era, only to become pretty much dormant during the 2010s, but at the near end came back very strongly, with not only a solid remake of a classic Game Boy title, but also released one of the most acclaimed entries in the series during the 2020s. And of course, I have to mention with the highly anticipated Metroid Prime 4, which is something that people have been waiting for since the very beginning of the Nintendo Switch. So yeah, I think I could safely say Metroid is currently one of Nintendo's bigger series during this generation. But as for my personal history with the series, I knew that Metroid was a thing for many years thanks to Super Smash Bros. Brawl back in the day, but I never really got to try the series out until I was a bit older and when the Wii U was recently new. And with this console, I was able to try out some of the Virtual Console games, and during a sale, I was able to get Super Metroid, but after playing it for the very first time, I honestly kinda suck at the game, to be honest. It was completely different from other 2D games I've played, as I've never really played a Metroidvania before that. But if we're talking about my opinions on the game today, I would honestly say I really enjoyed Super Metroid a lot, but back in the day, I kinda hold off the series for a while. It wasn't until around summer of 2016, I think, where Nintendo was during its lowest points. I decided to get some games off the Virtual Console since they were on sale, and one of them I saw was Metroid Zero Mission, and I thought, why not just to try it out? And man, that was one hell of a second try, because I really got addicted to Metroid Zero Mission back in the day. As I felt like something really clicked with me with this game compared to Super Metroid at the time, and I really got to see the appeal of the Metroid series because of this game. I liked it so much to the point where I actually picked up the other Metroid game on GBA, Metroid Fusion. Now for those who don't know, Metroid Zero Mission was a game that released in 2004 as it's a full-on remake / reimagining of the original game on NES. With the main goal of this game is to be a gateway to the Metroid series, and the best way to do so is to show them where it all started. Not only for a gameplay perspective, but also story-wise, because they also tried to add more story into this game to try and flesh out Samus' first ever mission. Which is the reason why they gave it the Zero Mission title. And it was also very perfect timing because since it released in the early 2000s, it was able to come out during when the Metroid series was thriving. And Nintendo did very interesting things with the marketing of Zero Mission by making a tie-in manga that tells the story of Samus right before her first ever game. And honestly, I recommend reading it because it shows more into some of the characters in the Metroid series. Like, when I first ever read this, it really dawned on me just how evil Ridley is. Like, seriously. Even though he seems like a giant feral flying beast, he is very intelligent and thrives on killing people. And he also has a really long history of Samus because it turns out in the manga, back when Samus was a little kid, Ridley and the Space Pirates invaded her colony and killed her parents, leaving Samus as a little orphan that was raised by the Chozos. And years later, when Samus became an adult, she eventually worked for the Galactic Federation before quitting to become the legendary bounty hunter. Which leads to us to the Metroid game where it all began. And so, with everything out of the way, let's get started. So for the story of Metroid Zero Mission, according to the manual, the year is 20-something-5 as a crisis occurs as space pirates have stolen the capsules containing samples of mysterious species, which was recently discovered on a lone planet called SR-388. And according to the researchers, these things, called Metroids, are very dangerous, as if the space pirates were able to breed them, they could use them as severe bioweapons that could lead to mass destruction across the galaxy, and so out of desperation, the Federation decided to call in a bounty hunter. And this is where Samus comes in, as she is hired to investigate planet Zebes across the various caverns. Alrighty, so for the gameplay of Zero Mission. Since the game basically shares the same engine as Metroid Fusion, it's basically if you take the controls of that game and try to refine them to make Samus feel a lot more snappy. And even though this is a remake of an NES game, they were able to add more stuff to the gameplay, like more refined levels to make traveling a lot more streamlined. They replaced the dated password saves with an actual save room. They added brand new upgrades like the super missiles and speed boosters, which, I'll be honest, I have no idea how to control this thing sometimes. And lastly, and most importantly, they add ziplines to this game. Whee! Now throughout the game, you can also find these mysterious items that Samus can pick up, which are supposed to be upgrades for her power suit, but for some reason they aren't compatible with it. and the only use you get out of it for the time being is you're able to destroy these certain blocks, while playing literally the most mysterious sounding music you'll ever hear in a game. Like, I'm not even kidding. If you are new to playing Metroid and you don't know where you're going, you can find these special Chozo statues that'll show you the way to the next upgrade. But it doesn't show you too much on how to get there because that's all up to you. And one convenient thing is that after you use the Chozo statues, you're able to use it as a small recharge station. This was a feature that was in Metroid Fusion, if I remember correctly, where in that game, since it was a lot more linear, Adam constantly shows you your next destination and what to do. But with that game, it leaned a lot more towards storytelling, so the linearity made a little bit more sense. Compare this to Metroid Zero Mission, where it's a lot more open what you can do in this game, as your main priority for progression in this game is trying to explore the caverns and try to upgrade as much as you can. That way you can defeat both Ridley and Kraid to unlock the way to see Mother Brain. And throughout your exploration, you'll find yourself with a plethora of upgradable missile tanks, energy tanks, and super ammo. That way you can make Samus as powerful as you can, which is honestly my favorite part of this game, as it's just very fun to explore every nook and cranny to find secret upgrades. And what's very neat is that the minimap on the top right will show you a subtle clue if an upgrade's nearby. That way you have a good idea that something is near and you can use all of your ammo or weaponry to see if anything happens. But if you want to make things a bit more interesting, you can always try and speedrun through this game as well. Since most of the Metroid games are fairly short and very open, it is a very popular game for speedrunners. Which, funny enough, by the time I was writing the script, I was watching a Metroid Zero Mission speedrun, and man, seeing speedrunners play through a Metroid game is very fascinating to see. Especially when they do the quickest routes, seeing all the shortcuts, and try to do high-end skills. Like with something like the bomb jump, for example, which is a technique where if you plant your bombs multiple times, Samus can do pretty much an infinite jump in a way. Now, as for the various bosses you'll meet along the way, well, for most of them, they're pretty damn easy for the most part. Like, this worm doesn't pick up a fight, neither does this worm. This giant bug boss fight more so drags than actually being challenged. And as for Kraid, honestly, he actually does put up a pretty good challenge. As since he's very gigantic, he has so many attacks going against you, and the difficulty just gets a lot harder the more you progress through the boss. I actually got my butt whooped a couple of times during this boss fight. And then there's Ridley. Throughout the game as you're playing through it, you'll be greeted by a couple of cutscenes of Ridley heading to Samus's location to finally finish the job. And once he lands on top of planet Zebes, he then heads all the way down to his lair where he tries to ambush Samus. And so this leads to the ultimate battle for Samus as she confronts the monster that took away her parents all those years ago. The cunning god of death versus the galactic bounty hunter. Only one person will leave this. Yep, that was pretty much it. Now, graphically and aesthetically, this game is rocking pretty good visuals for the GBA. Even though that we're exploring a very dark cavern, it really has a very vibrant feel to it, with all the areas that you explore throughout the game having a distinct style to it. Like with Norfair, for example, which has a focus on the color red since that's the fire world. Or with Criteria, for example, which is the only location where you're actually on surface level. And I think what makes the design of these areas really impressive is considering the fact that this was originally an NES game, where in that, the background is mostly just black. But heading all the way up to the GBA, this place really does feel like an alien location, with a lot of the enemies in this game having a really cool overhaul, especially with the bosses like Ridley. As in the original, he was only a bit bigger than Samus, but in the remake, he's just like this giant flying beast that roars. Doubly so for Kraid, as originally he was just a bit smaller than Samus, but in the remake, he is literally 10 times as bigger. It is also really rocking really cool remixes of classic NES soundtracks. And while I do prefer Fusion's sound design a bit more compared to Zero Mission, especially since they were able to do a lot of eerie ambience really well on the GBA, which is something that is very easy to mess up, as I mentioned in my last video, but I think the sound design for Zero Mission in general is just pretty good. Especially when we head to the final areas of Planet Zebes, as after you're able to defeat both Kraid and Ridley, you're able to access Terrain, which is the location where the space pirates hid the Metroids, which are the main enemies you'll be fighting around these areas, and they are no joke. Like seriously though, they're the most ruthless characters in the game as they constantly charge after Samus. And they don't necessarily attack Samus, but latch onto her and absorb her energy. So for a lot of time, you're just desperately trying to shake them off. And their only weakness is to attack them with the ice beam and then shoot them with missiles and they'll go down. But you need to be extra careful of going them down because they can easily pile up on you. And this all leads to the final battle with Mother Brain, as you need to constantly load her face up with missiles, while trying to avoid the projectiles and trying to not fall into the acid. Which is very easy to do so since how thin the platforms are. And after you defeat the disembodied brain, a self-destruct sequence then commits. And now Samus needs to jump on these really thin platforms to escape from the lair of Zebes. And eventually, as you head to the ship, Samus then finally escapes from planet Zebes. But then this remake decides to pull one more move on ya, as after Samus was able to escape from the planet, a bunch of space pirates ambushed her and took down her ship. Not only she's left stranded with a broken ship, but also her power suit was destroyed as well. And so the only way to leave planet Zebes is to enter the pirates' mothership. And so this leads to the most unique gameplay section of Metroid Zero Mission. Since Samus has been completely stripped of her power suit, she is completely defenseless, with the only thing that can actually protect her is this simple emergency pistol, which doesn't necessarily kill the enemy, but instead just stun them for a split sec. And so, the main focus of this area is more so on stealth than actual combat, as you need to sneak all the way through the guards, but sometimes they can ambush you by hiding in certain areas. And every time this happens, you're pretty much going, oh shoot, oh shoot, oh shoot! And this all leads to, after you travel across the ship, you'll find yourselves in the Chozo Temples, where if you do a small little challenge within the temples, Samus was able to obtain a brand new power suit, with all of her upgrades still intact. But not only that, but also the mysterious items that you couldn't use is finally useful thanks to this new power suit. And because of this, Samus is a lot more powerful than she was before. And so, you can finally be able to take your revenge on the space pirates for crashing your ship. And this also leads to a very open area as well. So you have one more try to look for every nook and cranny, find some more upgrades for the final battle. With the final boss being a robotic Ridley, who is, unironically, a lot more harder than the actual Ridley. Especially when you 100% the game, where this robot becomes even more challenging. But I wasn't able to do it because I have no idea how to use the f***ing speed boosters for this one. So I was basically fighting the normal version of this boss fight. And after the giant robot was able to go down, this leads to another self-destruct sequence, as Samus was able to steal one of the pirates' ship, concluding Metroid Zero Mission. And final verdict? Still one of the finest Metroid games in the series. Like seriously though, if you're very curious in the Metroid series and want to try it out, I highly recommend trying out Metroid Zero Mission, as it's not only a great way to see where the Metroid series started, but it's also one of the best remakes I've ever seen from a Nintendo game, period. As it does all the things what a remake should do very well. As not only it looks better, it plays better, and it feels a lot better to play through, but it adds so much new content to this game, making it the definitive way to play the original game. And this is not even talking about stuff like the bonus features that shows cool little artwork, but also if you're able to beat the game, you're able to play the original Metroid game on NES. Which is very cool because you get to see a side-by-side comparison on the game you just played compared to what it originally was. So yeah, if you have a Nintendo Switch Online service, I recommend trying out this game, as well as the other Metroid games. As besides Samus Returns, you can essentially play through every single mainline Metroid game under one console, which is very cool. And I'm very excited to see what Metroid has coming up next with the upcoming Metroid Prime 4. But as for the next video, we're gonna go immediately back to the Mario & Luigi series for their second entry on Nintendo DS. Which I'm very excited to do so because I played this game a lot when I was little, and I'm very excited to talk about this game again. But that'll do for today, so thank you for watching and I'll see you later. Bye bye!